Okay, get this. You ready for this? We've got a respected Jewish rabbi in 14th century Spain, becomes a hardcore Christian, and a radical critic of Aristotle, like all at the same time.
Whoa.
It's wild, right? That's Abner of Burgos
Wow.
Today we're going to dive into, well, his life and his works using the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy as our guide.
Cool.
This guy's journey, it's crazy. It takes some wild turns.
I bet.
He goes from, like, leading a Jewish academy all the way to, get this, challenging the church's views on, like, the Trinity.
So buckle up.
Yeah, buckle up for real, because
Yeah.
we're about to unpack some serious philosophical plot twists.
It's really amazing, how someone who just seemingly switched sides in this huge religious debate could end up impacting philosophy so much, like reaching way beyond just those first arguments, you know what I mean?
Right. It really makes you wonder, like, what could even lead to such a dramatic shift in thinking?
Yeah.
So before we go, like, full on into the theological fireworks, let's just, like, set the scene a little bit. Who was Abner, like, before his conversion?
Well, before he became known as Alfonso de Valladolid, after converting to Christianity, he was actually a really prominent figure in the Jewish community of Burgos.
Okay.
The Stanford Encyclopedia, it portrays him as like a respected rabbi, a busy book trader, maybe even a physician.
Oh, wow.
And he was head of a yeshiva.
A yeshiva?
Yeah, a Jewish academy. This guy had a lot going on.
Talk about a multi-hyphenate. Wow.
Right.
It sounds like he was already super, like, embedded in these scholarly circles.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And based on the sources he cites in his writings, it's clear he was plugged into all the philosophical trends of the time, like especially Aristotelian thought.
Yeah.
He actually belonged to a school of thought that was like trying to reconcile Maimonides
Maimonides, okay.
with the ideas of Averroes, who are both grappling with Aristotle's legacy. It's pretty complex stuff.
Wow. So we're not talking about just some, like, simple religious conversion here.
No.
This is a guy who is already, like, so deep in these philosophical debates. So what happened? What would lead someone like this to just completely flip their worldview?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
There's like this whole mystery surrounding his conversion.
Yeah.
And according to his own writing, like a big moment was this thing he called cross rainfall in a villa.
Cross rainfall? What?
Yeah. He describes meeting all these Jews who had witnessed crosses raining down from the sky, like sticking to their clothes.
Really?
And it seemed to have like shaken him to his core.
It's like something out of a dream or a vision or something.
Right.
It's kind of hard to even imagine, like, how people would have interpreted something like that back then.
It's crazy how like personal experiences, like, intertwined with all these intellectual struggles can just totally shift a worldview.
Yeah.
But the cross rainfall wasn't the only thing.
Okay.
He also mentions all these like vivid dreams, urging him to become a teacher of righteousness and guiding him toward Christianity. These dreams, it seems, they played a key role in his decision to convert.
So it's almost like he's being pulled in two different directions here. By reason, and by something more mystical.
Yeah.
Now, this is a good time to, like, address this thing that I keep hearing.
Okay.
Some people claim that Abner was secretly a Kabbalist before converting. What about that?
Yeah, that's a persistent myth.
Really?
Yeah. The Stanford Encyclopedia actually, it pretty effectively debunks it.
Okay.
They argue that, like, while Abner's ideas, they're definitely unusual.
Yeah.
His arguments about the Trinity and incarnation, they actually stem from, like, Neoplatonic and Christian scriptural ideas.
Not Kabbalah.
Right, not Kabbalah at all. Plus, his sources and how he, like, constructs his arguments just doesn't line up with Kabbalistic tradition.
Huh. So it seems like he's being, like, lumped in with another Rabbi Abner.
Possibly.
Who actually was a Kabbalist.
That makes sense.
But even without the Kabbalah connection, this conversion is still, like, a huge turning point for him. He goes from, like you said, leading a yeshiva to basically dedicating his life to Christianity and writing all this stuff to try to convert other Jews. Yeah. That must have been a pretty controversial move.
Oh, absolutely. And it takes us to his writing, which, to put it mildly, it's complicated.
Complicated how?
Well, his works, you can group them into three categories, polemical, scientific, and philosophical.
Okay.
It's in those polemical writings where things get really heated.
He doesn't hold back at all, does he?
Not at all, no. He directly challenges his former faith and tries to, like, totally dismantle Jewish arguments.
Wow.
His most famous work, Mostrador de Justicia, it's actually structured like a debate between like a Christian master
Okay.
and a Jewish rebel.
Okay, I like it.
But here's the really interesting thing.
Oh, what's that?
The rebel, he never actually converts in the book.
Oh, wow.
It's almost like Abner is still grappling with his own like internal doubts, playing them out on the page.
That's fascinating. It really suggests like this internal struggle, it just didn't stop after his conversion.
Right.
He's not just rejecting Judaism, he's like engaging with it in this really like complex way.
Yeah.
What other stuff did he write?
Well, there's Responses to the Blasphemer.
Responses to the Blasphemer. Okay.
Which was like a direct response to, get this, his former students' attacks on his ideas.
So they went back and forth a bit.
They did. It's clear that even after converting, he was still like super deep in these intense philosophical and theological debates.
So it wasn't a clean break. It sounds like he was like constantly wrestling with these big questions, which raises a fascinating question. Like, how did Abner reconcile his new faith with all of his philosophical background?
Yeah.
His ideas on the Trinity and Incarnation, I mean, they really seem to like push the boundaries.
Yeah, that's exactly where we're headed next.
Okay.
Get ready for some unconventional theology.
All right, I'm all ears.
Because Abner's views on the Trinity and Incarnation, they're unlike anything you'd expect.
Let's dive into that after a quick word from our sponsors.
All right, so we've got this picture of Abner, this rabbi turned Christian philosopher, still wrestling with his past and challenging both sides of the theological fence.
It's a fascinating story.
Yeah, it really is. Now for the really juicy stuff.
Let's get to it.
The ideas that, like, even ruffled feathers within the church.
You could say that.
Let's start with his take on the Trinity.
This is where Abner really goes off the beaten path. Instead of just, like, seeing the Trinity as purely faith, he tries to, like, find a logical, philosophical basis for it. He actually argues that the diversity of the world, just all the stuff in it, actually points to a necessary division within God.
So instead of just accepting the Trinity, like, as dogma,
right,
he's actually looking for proof, like, try and make it make sense.
Exactly, yeah. He proposed that God's infinite force, which he identifies as, the Father, would just completely overwhelm the finite material world if there wasn't, like, some kind of transformer to adapt it.
And transform?
Yeah, that's where the Son comes in.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Keep going. So the Son, he acts as, like, a buffer, almost like a step-down transformer, so the divine energy doesn't, blow out the cosmic circuit. What about the Holy Spirit?
That's interesting. Abner doesn't really ever address the Holy Spirit's role in this whole framework. His focus is very much on the relationship between the Father and the Son as a way to, like, explain why the world is both, diverse and delimited.
So it's like a two-part trinity, at least for him.
At least in this specific context, yeah.
This transformer idea, that's pretty wild.
It is.
How does that connect to his understanding of the Incarnation?
This is where things get even more radical.
Okay.
Abner believed that, like, divine essence it's present in, like, absolutely everything.
Everything.
Yeah, and that humans, they have the potential to, like, purify their own matter and achieve a higher degree of this divine essence within themselves.
So it's not just that God is out there somewhere.
Right.
It's like there's a spark of the divine, like in everything.
Precisely, yeah. And for Abner, Jesus, he wasn't a separate divine being, in the traditional sense.
Right.
He saw Jesus as the pinnacle of this purification process. Jesus, according to Abner, was born with the purest form of matter, which allowed him to, like, achieve the highest possible union with, this divine essence.
So instead of Jesus being the Son of God in, like, the traditional sense, he's more like the ultimate self-made man, spiritually speaking. It's showing us, like, what's possible.
You could put it that way, yeah. And it ties into his really interesting view on original sin. He believed that Adam's sin, it wasn't disobeying a rule.
Okay.
It was a fundamental, like, misunderstanding of our relationship to the divine. Adam's error was, like, mistaking his own intellect, which Abner sees as, like, a manifestation of the divine within him for God himself.
So the sin wasn't like disobedience. It was more like spiritual egotism, thinking we are God, instead of just recognizing the spark of the divine within us.
Exactly. And for Abner, the Torah, with its emphasis on God's unity, it was like a course correction, trying to get humans back on track.
Okay.
But it was incomplete. He believed that Jesus came to reveal, like, the full truth, the truth about this divine essence that's within all things.
It's like he's saying that like both Judaism and Christianity were pointing toward the same truth, but that Jesus was like the ultimate revelation of it.
Yeah.
This is a pretty different take on Jesus than like what the church was teaching back then.
Yeah, for sure.
He's reinterpreting both traditions through this very like specific philosophical lens.
Yeah, he is.
But if Jesus is just like the highest example of what humans can achieve, doesn't that kind of contradict the whole idea of him being like the unique son of God?
It absolutely does, yeah. Abner's views were really controversial. They went against the grain of, official church doctrine. But that's what makes him so fascinating. He wasn't afraid to like challenge conventional thinking. Even after, converting to a new faith, he's wrestling with these really profound questions, trying to make sense of them, using the philosophical tools that he has.
It makes you wonder how much of this wrestling like was influenced by his, his background in Jewish philosophy. It's not like he could just erase all of that.
That's a really important point. And it actually leads us to another one of Abner's big challenging ideas.
Okay.
His belief in complete determinism.
Hold on, determinism. That's the idea that like everything is predetermined, that we don't have free will.
That's it, exactly.
Wow.
He devoted an entire book, Ofrenda de Zielos, to this very concept.
Yeah.
He argued that like while we might feel like we have, a certain amount of free will, our choices, they're ultimately determined by external factors, things outside of our control.
That's a pretty heavy concept. Do you have like an example, a way to make this a bit more concrete?
Yeah, he uses this great analogy of wax.
Wax, okay.
Think of a lump of wax,
Yeah.
It's got the potential to be molded into all sorts of different shapes.
Right.
But ultimately, it's the person shaping the wax who's deciding what form it will take. They choose one possibility out of many. Abner argues it's the same with humans.
Okay.
We might have the capacity for all these different choices, but things like, our upbringing, society, even random events, they all contribute to like shaping our actions.
So we're like the wax.
Yeah.
And the external factors are like the sculptor, kind of guiding us toward a predetermined outcome.
That's the ideal.
If that's true, though, doesn't that make our choices kind of meaningless?
Right.
Like, what's the point of trying to be good or of, commandments or reward and punishment if we don't really have any control?
Those are great questions, and they're exactly the kind of questions that Abner grappled with, too.
Yeah.
His answer is that even though we might not have ultimate control, our actions still have consequences. He compares it to a father making his son take medicine. Whether the son wants to take the medicine or not,
right,
the medicine will still have an effect.
So it's like even if we're like playing out a script that's already written, our choices, our actions, they still like matter in the grand scheme of things.
That's the idea. And he believed the Torah, with all its laws and commandments, it acts like kind of like medicine, guiding people towards righteous behavior, even if their ultimate choices are, in a sense, predetermined.
This is pretty mind-bending stuff.
Yeah.
It seems like he's really trying to find a way to reconcile the idea of determinism with like the teachings of both Judaism and Christianity. But it makes you wonder, who is his target audience for this?
Yeah.
I mean, after all, he's writing all these like complex philosophical treatises years after converting to Christianity. Was he trying to convince other Jews? Or was he like engaging in a broader philosophical conversation?
That's what makes Abner so intriguing. Even like decades after converting, he was still so deep in Jewish philosophical debates. Ofrenda de Zielos, his book on determinism, it's filled with all these references to Jewish texts and thinkers. It really suggests he wasn't just trying to like reject his past, but to integrate it into his new worldview.
So it's almost like he's building a bridge between these two worlds, challenging both Jewish and Christian thinkers with these radical ideas.
Exactly, yeah. And his ideas on determinism especially, they had a big impact on later Jewish philosophers. For example, Hasdai Crescas.
Hasdai Crescas.
Yeah, a really prominent Jewish thinker. He disagreed with Abner on religion, obviously, but he adopted a lot of his philosophical views, particularly on determinism. Crescas, in turn, went on to influence, Western thought more broadly.
It's amazing to think how someone who, I don't know, could be seen as a, like, religious defector ended up having such a lasting influence on, like, both Jewish and Christian intellectual history. This just proves, like, the power of ideas, how they can cross boundaries and have, like, totally unexpected consequences.
Absolutely.
But we're not done with Abner just yet. The Stanford Encyclopedia also mentions that he was a critic of Aristotle's scientific ideas.
Oh, yeah.
What was that all about?
This is another area where Abner's thinking really, really stands out. Unfortunately, his major work on science, the New Philosophy, it's lost.
Oh, that's a shame.
Yeah, it's lost to history. But we can get a sense of his ideas from his other writings. He challenged some of Aristotle's core principles, like the idea that a physical object, it's inseparably linked to all of his properties, things like size and weight.
Okay, that's a bit hard to wrap my head around.
Yeah.
What did he disagree with specifically?
Well, Aristotle believed that there's an unbreakable link between an object and its characteristics.
Right.
But Abner argued that an object could exist even without those specific properties. He used the example of transubstantiation during the Catholic Mass to illustrate his point.
The ritual where the bread and wine become the body and blood of Christ.
Exactly, yeah. Abner used his theory to try to explain this transformation. He claimed that at the core of every physical object is this pure divine essence, something beyond any physical property.
Okay.
During transubstantiation, he argued that the bread and wine are basically stripped down to this core essence, which he identified with the body of Christ.
It's almost like he's saying that beneath the surface of things, there's a deeper, more fundamental reality that's not bound by those superficial characteristics.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And he didn't stop there. He also challenged Aristotle's ideas on place and movement. Aristotle believed that objects move because they're drawn to their natural place in the world.
Right, like a rock falling to the ground.
Yeah, exactly. Because its natural place is at the center of the earth.
That makes sense.
Right. But Abner disagreed.
Really?
Yeah, he saw movement as a result of the interplay of forces.
Okay.
Not like some inherent attraction to a specific location.
So it's more about push and pull, cause and effect,
Right.
rather than an object's destiny to be in a certain place.
Yes, exactly. And he applied this same kind of thinking to critique other Aristotelian concepts, like the idea of a void, which Aristotle rejected. It's really remarkable because, Abner was developing these critiques around the same time as the philosopher William of Ockham.
William of Ockham.
But they arrived at their conclusions totally independently. It shows that these challenges to, traditional Aristotelian thought, they were emerging in different intellectual circles, like a real shift in the intellectual landscape.
So Abner wasn't just a lone voice in the wilderness. He was part of a larger movement, questioning long-held assumptions.
Exactly, yeah.
And his ideas, just like his philosophical ones, ended up influencing other thinkers.
Absolutely. Hasdai Crescas, who we mentioned earlier, he incorporated a lot of Abner's scientific ideas into his own work, which ultimately had a ripple effect on Western thought.
It's incredible how someone who, started as a rabbi in 14th century Spain could end up having such just a profound impact, both within the Jewish community and on the trajectory of Western philosophy.
It really is.
Abner's story is a reminder that ideas, they can transcend boundaries, that they can, take root in unexpected places and blossom into something truly remarkable. But we're not done yet.
We're not.
There's more to explore when it comes to Abner's legacy.
I'll do that more.
We'll delve into that right after this. So we've explored all these radical ideas on the Trinity, the Incarnation, determinism, and even his critiques of Aristotle.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. It's kind of mind-blowing, actually. What's really striking to me is how just this one person managed to challenge both Jewish and Christian thought in such profound ways. But how did those challenges land? Did any of his ideas stick, or were they just too out there for people back then?
Well, it's an interesting mix. On the one hand, his theological arguments, they didn't really make much of a dent in mainstream Christian thought. The church wasn't exactly ready to embrace his unconventional views on, the Trinity and the Incarnation.
Yeah, that's not too surprising, I guess. He was basically saying that, Jesus was more of a role model than a divine being, and that, the divine is inside all of us. That's, a pretty big jump from, traditional church doctrine.
For sure. However, on the other hand, his impact on Jewish philosophy, huge, immense.
Really?
Oh, yeah. His polemical works, where he's, directly engaging with those Jewish arguments, they kept being referenced in Jewish-Christian debates for centuries.
Whoa.
But what's really remarkable is how much his philosophical ideas, even the ones that challenge traditional Jewish thought, resonated like within that Jewish intellectual community.
So it's almost like even though he'd converted to Christianity, his ideas still found a home amongst like his former people. Makes you wonder if that was his intention all along.
It's possible. He clearly never fully abandoned like his engagement with Jewish thought. And a key figure in all this is Hasdai Crescas.
Hasdai Crescas.
Yep, a prominent Jewish philosopher who, lived just a generation after Abner. Despite their different religious views, Crescas adopted a lot of Abner's philosophical arguments, like weaving them into his own work.
So Abner was like this unexpected bridge builder.
You could say that.
Leaving a legacy that like goes beyond religious boundaries.
Exactly, yeah. And Crescas' work, that went on to influence Western philosophy as a whole. It's a great example of how ideas, they can like take on a life of their own, spreading in unexpected ways and shaping intellectual history.
So looking back on all of this, like what stands out to you the most about Abner? Is it, I don't know, his audacity to challenge like the status quo, his intellectual restlessness, or something else completely?
For me, it's the enduring power of his ideas. Here's this guy who, on the surface, it looks like he just like switched sides in this huge religious debate.
Right.
Yet he ends up having this profound impact on philosophy that goes way beyond those first arguments. His story is a testament to the fact that like ideas can transcend boundaries, even ones that seem like insurmountable. They can spark new ways of thinking, inspire future generations, and continue to resonate long after we're gone.
Abner of Burgos, a rabbi, a convert, a philosopher, a scientific thinker, and ultimately like a catalyst for new ideas that continue to shape how we think about the world.
It's been an incredible journey, like unpacking his life and work. I don't know about you, but I'm definitely going to be doing some more digging into his writings. I think, that's the mark of a truly fascinating figure. They leave you with more questions than answers and a desire to, like, explore further.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder the complexities of Abner of Burgos and the enduring power of ideas to challenge, inspire, and shape, our understanding of the world. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.